I think it's also important to know where your limitations are so that you're not focusing on the limitations, but instead identifying the skills you have and showcasing those skills in a way that kind of shines through your portfolio rather than focusing on all the things you don't know, because nobody knows everything, especially in the tech industry, which moves so fast anyway.
Hi, I'm with Ananya today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm so happy to be here. So I work as a front-end developer at Shopify. Previous to that, I was in India and I was working as a front-end developer mostly. And I moved to Canada just last year, right before the pandemic. Not a great time to move, but well, I did that. Yeah, so far it has been challenging because of the pandemic, but also it has been great working at Shopify.
And just for context, Ananya and I both work at Shopify, as Ananya mentioned. And I think we started just like weeks apart and
Yeah,
we probably saw each other once. And
probably, yes.
literally right before the pandemic happened and we were all sent home. So it was very short-lived.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we did like an office tour together.
We
Somehow I'm
did,
remembering
yes.
that. Yeah.
So
But
sad.
we didn't know that each other back then, so we didn't really talk.
Exactly. Yeah, we actually connected, I think, like after through like virtual calls. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Ananya is awesome. So I'm excited
Oh, you're
to
awesome too.
I'm excited to start chatting about your journey into front end and I guess specifically UX
Mm-hmm.
development.
Yeah.
So you said that you started off as like a front end developer in
Mm-hmm.
India. So did you transition into a UX developer role?
Yeah, so actually, the UX developer role is like a new role, which is still not like an industry standard, and some companies do have that title. But the emphasis on being a UX developer is actually that you do front end, but also like front end development has many layers to it. There are like some devs who work if you can call it like the back end of front end. I don't know, it's too many tech jargons right there. But it's more that so the UX devs work in the layer where it's more integrated with design, and they work with designers in different layers. So they are talking with designers and collaborating with them, prototyping with them. So that's where the UX dev layer comes in the front end realm, basically. Some people do just go by the general front end developer term, but now the industry is recognizing that even the front end has many layers to it, where you recognize that there are people who are more doing the front end side of things with designers and thinking about accessibility and having that UX mindset, which necessarily not every web developer or front end developer might have. So I started as a front end dev, but slowly, like after starting and working on many projects and stuff, I realized that, oh, maybe I do have a little bit more inclination towards design. But I didn't necessarily want it to be a designer because I do love coding and I like to work in development. So from there, started reading up a little bit about it and understanding that, oh, there is this different layer. Even though it's not an industry standard, we don't really have as many UX devs, but there are so many front end devs who are doing this kind of work, but maybe they necessarily don't have the right title. But yeah, that was my introduction to the UX side of this development, and also like my interest in development comes together, which is great.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know, and I guess for people who might not have too much of an understanding into, what front end is and
Mm-hmm.
this new role of UX development. I think you touched on it a little bit, but if you had
Mm-hmm.
to differentiate it maybe in a couple sentences, how would you compare the two?
So, if we just talk about front end development, that is basically building websites and web apps, what we're seeing on the browser, on the screen these days. So, the interface that you interact with, that is what the front end developer is building. But then even in building that, there are many layers to it. So if we start with design, that is where the design craft comes in. And then after the design is built, the developer is going to take that design and is going to write some code and make it interactive and all of that. And so the part where UX dev comes in is basically, you can see there is this design craft, and then we start with the front end dev. So it's the bridge between those two. There is also this aspect where taking that design and making it into different components and making it accessible and making it interactive, adding micro interactions. You're collaborating with the designer because, of course, the designer has had some vision when they were creating that design. So to translate that design onto screen, that's how I see the middle layer of UX dev comes in.
So where was your first UX developer role?
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned, that since the UX developer title is actually not like an industry standard and not many companies use it. So my official title, front end developer, because the title didn't exist. But even on the job, I recognize that this is the kind of skills that I want to have. And I always loved working with designers. So my first job was at a design agency. That experience is quite different as compared to working at a product company. So when I was working at that design agency, it was very clear to me that I loved working with designers and loved working the process that they used to go from wireframes to design and all the ideation that used to happen. And to me, that was really exciting. But as a developer, not a lot of times you're included in those conversations. But I would always make a case for myself that no, I want to be involved in those conversations because I like them. But yeah, so from there, I started to explore that area where I did like some reading. I don't really have like a professional course or anything I don't have a design background. I do have like a software development background. But yeah, like discovering that in that design realm and that UX realm really helped me to understand what I particularly like to do. And that also solidified because the more I interacted with designers, and we had like really great designers at that company, and just interacting with them really helped me understand all the skills that I wanted to cultivate. Yeah, so just to like answer your question, I didn't really have a UX dev title before, but I was always functioning in that role altogether. And I made it clear that this is the skill set that I have. And yeah, like people recognize it that, oh, this is the kind of skill set that she has. If there is something that people need help with, go, you need to write this component. And if they wanted to choose like a person who would go in and talk to the designer, it would always be me because they understood that this is where like her skill sets comes in. So yeah, it's like making your skill to your colleagues. I think that really helps because again, like sometimes you might not be having the exact particular title that you want in a company, but that shouldn't stop you from exercising those skills and making those a part of your job, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. With your background and having the software and like the development experience already.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges you experienced as you were trying to get like your first job? And maybe let's start off with your first job in India, and then let's talk about Shopify.
Yeah. So the first job, when I was in college, I did my computer science degree. So I come from like a traditional programming background, but I quickly realized that I didn't really just want to write programs in that way because I liked the front end realm of it. And I was starting to discover that realm because I like to get quick feedback. That's when I want my first job to be in this. But the catch was that I didn't really have any internship or professional experience because all my internship or my training, if you will, that was as a back-end developer or like writing big software programs, but which were not necessarily in the front end realm. So I didn't really have any professional experience or internship to show for that, oh, this is my skill, but I wanted that to be my first job. That was like kind of clear to me by the end of my like university. So it was a bit difficult in the beginning because of course everybody wants experienced people, but again nobody will give people jobs to get them experience. Like that's a vicious cycle anyway. Yeah, so I realized I can't compete with people who have experience, but also like I would empathize with the recruiters that of course how will they hire me if they don't even know what skills I have. So that's when I started to start working on like small personal side projects, nothing too big, but just so that I could showcase that yes, these are the things that I have learned, and just for them a way to see that, oh, you know what, even if maybe she didn't have a professional internship or something before that, but she knows at least something. So all I wanted was to just at least get the interview so that your resume is not just tossed away even before you could get a chance to showcase your skills. So that's where the idea of making a portfolio comes in. And I know making a portfolio is a very common thing as when you're in the design world, but it's not as common as a developer. It has become now, but it wasn't really back then. So that's where I made like small websites to showcase some of like those design skills as well. And yeah, through making those small projects, and they were like really horrible. Now that I look back on it, they were like so bad. But anyway, that did the job back then. So yeah, so I made like a small portfolio website kind of thing. And then I used to send that along with my resume to, I don't know, probably like hundreds of companies. And every time, like people would just say, oh, yeah, that's great. We're looking for somebody experienced. I'm like, ah, but if you don't give me a job, how will I gain that experience? Yeah, but luckily the first job that I got at this design agency, the work that I did, and yeah, so like long story short, like I got hired over there, and it was difficult to work in that capacity because as I mentioned, like I didn't really, I was only used to working with like small projects that I built, and probably like few I did back in college. But yeah, it was challenging when I started because I didn't know what I was doing, but I was happy that I was there. It was challenging, but also rewarding that finally, like what I was trying to do made sense. And I liked doing that. So, yeah, it was an interesting journey back then.
I'm so happy that you got through that hurdle because I think that's one of the hardest things to mentally go through before getting your first job. And you talked about like a lot of small projects that you added to your portfolio to show people that you can do the work. So where did you find these little projects?
I think it was just like me and my terrible ideas. But also, like sometimes you would look at a website or anything and you would think, oh, maybe I could just recreate this thing, or can I do this? So if you look at probably like a sports website or something like a news website, and then you could think that, oh, I like this layout and I can like recreate that layout somehow. And so that's where you kind of showcase your skills that, oh, I can create like layouts like this. So the way I approached it was I listed down the kind of skills I wanted to showcase and then thought about what kind of projects I can do so that these particular skills can show through those projects. So I didn't really do a big project, but I selected the skills I wanted to showcase and then made through that skills. So that was like my approach to that because I knew that if I tried to build like a big kind of software something, I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that because I knew there is a limitation of my skills. And I think it's also important to know where your limitations are so that you're not focusing on the limitations but instead identifying the skills you have and showcasing those skills in a way that kind of shines through your portfolio rather than focusing on all the things you don't know, because nobody knows everything, especially in the tech industry, which moves so fast anyway.
That's so true. You're in this little circle and there's always going to be something beyond that you
Oh my
still
God,
don't
yes.
know, and you still have to dive in, and you just keep discovering that. And I think that's what makes this learning process, in especially in tech, so exciting, because
Yeah.
and also scary at the same time. It's constantly progressing, and there's just more and more stuff that you always have to continue learning.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's overwhelming as well. I think you have to have that kind of balance in that mindset. It can be like so overwhelming and you will be suppressed under your imposter syndrome because every day you will see somebody who's better than you, who's doing better than you, who is like so much more talented than you. But to realize that everybody has their own journey and everybody has their own way that they find. Yeah, don't compare yourself to others, and also recognizing that you are not going to learn everything that there is. And I think as beginners, everybody makes this mistake. They try to learn everything that there is, and that's where like it becomes so overwhelming. So yeah, like just identifying some of the things that you really care about and just at least being really good at those things first, and then to broaden your horizon from there on. I think that's a better approach that had helped me, because I know earlier I was like, oh, I found this new shiny thing, I want to learn that, and then the next weekend I was learning something else, and I realized quickly that I wasn't really getting better at any of those things. I was just becoming very basic at a lot of things, and I didn't like that. So I had to remind myself that it's okay. You don't have to learn everything, but make sure that the things that you really know enough so that you can say, oh, I know this particular thing. So people would recognize that, yes, she does know that, because that's the kind of expertise you showcase in your work.
Yeah, I'm not sure whoever's listening to this, how many of you have heard like growing your T, like the letter T.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's literally what you're talking about,
Yeah.
is you can be like an expert in all these things, but then there's like that one thing
Mm-hmm.
that people will come to you for. And I think that's
Yes.
something that you will figure out as you start to learn more things, and I think start to work on things
Mm-hmm.
originally. So at the beginning, you might find that you're like at this level. I think I can guess it's the same for developers, but I know as a designer, like coming in, you're just like on this like
Mm-hmm.
horizontal level where you just know all these things. And then I think once you start your first job and like get
Yeah.
into depths of like specific things, like maybe research is like where your expertise is, and that's where you want to grow.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's true for, I guess, every field. I don't know about every field, but especially like all the fields that we have in the tech world. I think that that's very true. That once you begin, you have this plethora of things that you can learn, but at some point you have to stop and do a little bit of introspection that, oh, I know all of these things, but what is that one thing, or probably two things, or whatever, something that makes me enjoy that thing and that I really care about that thing. And then that's where you should do a little bit more of like focus work in that area. Because if you just keep on learning like everything that there is, then yeah, I don't think that's possible. Nobody really knows everything. Even it doesn't matter like how much experience you have. If you talk to somebody who has had 20 years of experience in tech, they would still come up and say, oh yeah, I don't know that thing because I've never really worked on that. So yeah, I think keeping that in mind is important, because it does get really overwhelming when you see like all the things that you have to learn. And I think that's where the imposter syndrome kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start learning, you can free yourself up from that expectations that you put on yourself, that, oh, I need to know everything to get better, or I need to know everything to get that job. You don't need to know everything. You just need to know some things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I'm glad you also touched on imposter syndrome. And I know we've all experienced it and we're still experiencing it. That feeling
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't go away,
Doesn't go away.
because
Yeah, that's true.
because Ananya, as you mentioned, even like from day to day, like we're always, going to be working with people or meeting people who feel like, oh wow, like they're so great, they're so good at this. I'm not even there
Yeah.
yet. And then you're
Yeah.
always so hard on yourself. And I think that's something that we all need to get better at not doing
Yeah.
is don't be so hard on yourself.
It's true. And it's really hard to do that. I know that I'm saying all these things and it's so easier said than done because I know I do it to myself, even though I know that it's not fair to me. But also, like, some days I would be like, oh, I wish I was like that good. And especially if you see like really young people who are doing really great things, and then that kind of age thing comes to your mind. Oh, this person is so younger than I am, and that person is doing like amazing things. Oh, maybe I should at least do so much more better than that person. And that's like a vicious cycle, I think you have to deal with. And I don't think there is ever a cure for imposter syndrome. It's definitely a journey that you have to kind of deal. Like, some days it's better, some days you feel good about yourself, but then there are
Yeah.
some days when you just don't feel that great, and that's where that imposter thing kind of kicks in.
Yeah, you're so
Yeah.
right about there not being a cure. Like, I think it's just learning how to live with it and learning
Yeah.
how to manage it. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get into these negative like feelings, and then I think it's just important to just experience it. And
Yes.
I think just embrace it. It's okay, you're feeling this way. Just go through the emotions, just
Mm-hmm.
go through it. And I think that's part of growth too, is from time and time again, as you continue to experience it, you will naturally get better at it. You'll have a better way of learning how to live with it and how to manage it. Just feel it. Just feel it.
That's true. Yeah, as you mentioned, like embracing it and acknowledging it, I think it's important. And also, I think the main kind of takeaway with all the imposter syndrome like discussions that people like have time to time is that it's okay to feel that, because everybody feels it. And I think it's a very human thing to do. Of course, you're going to have like bad days. Not every day you're going to feel your 100%. But the important takeaway from that is to learn how to manage that and get out of that zone, basically. Because if you keep on feeling that every day, then it's so easy for that kind of bad days to become like a bad year or something like that. If you're someday you're not feeling it, then I don't know, take a pint of ice cream and watch Netflix or
Love
whatever
that.
that makes you feel good. Just do it. But also remember that it's like it's a bad day, and that's fine to have a bad day. But also acknowledge that, you know what, tomorrow it's going to be good, and then tomorrow get up and start doing your work. And I think that is what the only kind of cure, not exactly the cure, but the only way to manage it is to get through it and then come outside of it, basically. um
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think, yeah, that's there. And
Yeah.
it's if like people who might be listening to this they would think that like people who have had a lot of experience, they don't feel imposter syndrome. That's a lie. Everybody feels imposter syndrome. And I used to think that as well, like when I was just getting started, and I would think, oh, once I have 4 years of experience, I would be great at it. No, I am not. Like, I now have, like, yeah, almost 4 years of experience working in tech. But I like almost probably like once a month I would definitely feel like, oh, I wish I was better, or I wish, I was this thing or that thing, or just like trying to compare myself with other people. And that's a part of
Yeah.
life, so you just have to like live with it and
Yeah.
understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for summarizing that, because I think this is a very important thing to talk about, because we'll all feel it. And especially when you're trying to either get into the tech field or you're trying to transition, trying to get your first job, you will feel all of these. Ananya, I think you have gone through your fair share of that, because you were talking about how you had to send in so many applications and you've had your fair share of rejections, even
Yeah.
with a solid background in
Yeah.
development. So it's not easy. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about, were there any other things that you tried, and what did you do during this time to keep yourself motivated and to keep yourself going?
I think it was that I just had that motivation because I knew that this was it. Like, I almost had it in my mind that, oh, this is it, and I have to give everything that I can to this thing, because I know that once I get my start in this field, it will get better, because getting that first job and getting that first job in the place that you want is like the biggest barrier that you can cross when you're starting out. Once you have that experience, if you're now like a designer, if for example you want to break into design, but once you get that first job, and in your title it says that you're a UX designer, product designer, whatever, so the next job that you're trying to get, you don't have to go through all those hurdles, because now you already have that title in your resume. So that makes things a bit easier. I also did used to talk to a lot of people who were in this industry and how they got their jobs and what they did and some things like that. So I think making connections with people who are on the similar boat as you are is important as well. And it also makes you feel less lonely, because it makes you feel like, oh yeah, I'm not the only one who's trying this, there are other people who are doing this. And then also like talking to people who are doing that job, who are already in that role, is also helpful, because it then gives you that perspective of they are in that position that you want to be in, so you can seek that advice from them, what they did and worked out for them. So having that connections through meetups, or there are like online groups as well, so through all of these avenues, I think it's really helpful. Also, not just in making connections are always great to make, but also for your mental health as well, because then you don't feel as lonely in this journey, and you don't have to take through all the rejections on your own. You can like share with people who understand that and who are going through the same thing. So yeah, so like making connections, I think it's really important. And also like through those connections, you never know, you might just get like some job lead as well. So if you're in a group and you're talking to people, and probably somebody is working in some company and they would say, oh yeah, I have this opening, do you want to apply to that? And that obviously, like that also has a benefit of making connections and having that network of people. Yeah.
I'm curious to know if you've used any specific resources to build your connections during that time.
Yeah, so I not exactly, I wasn't really big on social media back then, but today like social media is a great place to be. Like social media was there, I was just not active on it, it's just me. But yeah, so even like for today, I would say that Twitter is a good place. It's not really, there are some people who are like really mean and stuff, but it's still like a good place to keep checking, because I know that a lot of people do post jobs and stuff, and I myself have seen a lot of people get leads from there. So that's also a good place to check in. But I think the good place to look for those kind of people is their local meetup pages and stuff, because that's where you can meet people who are within your own area. And it's easier to make connections if you're living in the same city and you're living in kind of same situation, because again, something that's true in India might not be true someplace else. And same like now, like I am in Canada, but it might not be like similar to what my experience in India was. So relying on those local events and local meetups, I think really helps, because it also puts like a good perspective on how the tech scene in your city is. And it will also help you evaluate that, do you want to stay in that city, or maybe do you want to move to a different city, because maybe the kind of community that you're seeking is not probably not there in your city. And so that could be like a good way to evaluate how things are in your city and also make those local connections.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And let's dig into your transition to Canada and like into Shopify. So when Shopify came around, like how did that happen? Were you looking for a job outside of India, or was that just something that came up?
Yeah, so I wasn't looking for a job outside India, and I wasn't even planning on that necessarily. I would say that I was looking for a job, for a switch, but it wasn't like an active thing. Like sometimes you, once you start to feel a little bit stagnant in your old job, you would think that, oh yeah, maybe I should start looking for a job. So I was in that zone. I wasn't actively interviewing places. I wasn't actively looking at jobs, and definitely not outside India. So like somebody from Shopify reached out to me that, oh, we're looking for, like, we have this opening in the Ottawa office and do you want to interview? And my first reaction was, this is a spam. I don't think that somebody from Shopify would reach out to me. And I almost ignored that email and deleted it. But then I was like, let me check the email. And that seemed legit. And I was like, oh, sure, it's okay. I'll just say yes. We'll see whatever happens. Yeah, that's how kind of I responded. And then with like series of interviews happened, and then I got through all those levels. And when I was finally offered the job, and I was like, oh, maybe I am moving out of India now, it was a surprise to me, because I don't know, like it felt as if that this was not real. Like sometimes when things happen, you would think that, oh, maybe this is just, it's like by fluke, because again, very heavily impacted by my own imposter syndrome. I was like, oh, I don't think I'm good enough to work there, because I would think that, oh, they have like amazing engineers working over there. I don't think I'm good enough to be a part of that. And I think like everybody thinks like that. So yeah, so when I got the offer, that's when I was like, oh, okay, sure, I guess I'll move because why not? It sounds like a good thing to do. Yeah.
That's awesome. And that's a huge move and a brave move, especially now when we're thinking about where we are. And
Mm-hmm.
like, how was the process like? Because you've been through like interviews in India and the process
Mm-hmm.
of getting a job there and then over here. So
Yeah.
was there much of a difference?
Yeah, there definitely was a difference. So when in the past, like in all my interviews back in India, it was much more. Okay, let me find the right term. It was much more like going into the very much of like the deep technical details, and the interviews were more like very much detailed, as in, oh, I work in JavaScript language. So there were a lot of questions people would ask of the language itself, like your understanding of the technology itself. But when I interviewed at Shopify, it was more of a practical approach, which I really liked. So it wasn't about, oh, how much do you know about JavaScript, but it was like, oh, we have this problem statement and we need to make this thing. How would you make it? And then it was more like a pair programming thing. So I had somebody who was pairing with me, and it was more like a collaborative process, and that was really enjoyable. And it was the kind of interview that I hadn't done before, because like companies that I had interviewed earlier back in India, people were not doing that. Probably some companies do, of course, but like speaking from my experience, like those companies didn't do that. It was more like a interview in a way that the interviewer would try to grill me with a lot of questions. That's how my interviews were back then. But the interview at Shopify was really great, because it almost felt like I wasn't interviewing. It felt like I was just working with this one other developer, which I think also calmed my nerves, because it wasn't really, I didn't feel like I was giving an interview. It just felt like a normal day of work. And I think that also helped me perform my best, because I wasn't nervous. Uh, that, oh my god, this is an interview and this person is asking me all these questions, and like once you're nervous, you tend to forget even the smallest thing,
Yeah.
and then you would be like, oh, really, I forgot that thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if this is like unique to Shopify, but I definitely think we need to make more interview processes less
Oh my
like
god, yes.
feeling like you're being grilled every time, because
Yes,
you're not going to be doing that every day. You're going to be working with
exactly.
people and interacting with people. So that should be the most important part of your
Yes,
interview. And
for
of course, your
sure.
technical skills. You
Mhm.
have to be able to work and build things. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that makes it very interesting, the differences that you saw from your process
yeah.
in India and how it is here. And I wanted to end off with asking if there's like a piece of advice that you wanted folks to take away from our
Mhm.
conversation today, what would that be?
Oh man, these are always so hard to answer. Okay, so I would say like it'll be really overwhelming once you start to delve into other development or design or anything. Like all of these fields really has a lot of things that you need to learn. and the things that you would need to do. So it's okay to be overwhelmed. Like it's not just you. Everybody did start from that point of overwhelm, but then also remember that it could be like a bad day, and that's fine. It's not going to be a bad year. So just think about that and just keep doing what you're doing. Remember to challenge yourself and try to think of the things that you feel almost uncomfortable doing. And if it's public speaking that you want to do, then don't think that, oh, I don't have enough experience to do that. You have all the experience to do that. And I think that's really important. And even a lot of people do write like blog posts and stuff like that. And I know a lot of beginners would think, oh, I don't know enough to write something about it. But the thing that you need to understand is it's okay if you don't know all the things, but you do have a unique perspective, and that's unique to you because every individual has a unique perspective. So don't let that idea or that thought that I don't know enough to stop you from doing something. If you want to do something, just do it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? You're just gonna,
Exactly.
I don't know, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you're just not gonna do well, and that's fine. You can move on from that. It's not going to be the end of the world. So just don't be afraid to keep trying and doing the things that you want to do. Yeah, I'd say that.
I love that. And those are such great points to end off with. And I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate that. So thank you so
Sure.
much, Ananya, for your time and sharing, your life story. It was so
Of
great chatting
course.
with you.
Yes, this was really fun.